Great. I'd like to welcome our speakers. So we've got Moira Mattingley-Nunn, who is an Education Officer at Biffa. Biffa is the waste management company that Wakefield Council have selected to deal with our local waste. And then we have Julie Greenwood, who's our Strategic Waste Policy Manager, and she's from Wakefield Council. So I'm delighted to hand over to Moira.
Hi everyone, let's check this is going to share. Can everyone see that? Yeah, can see the slides, fabulous. Thanks for joining us. So as I said, I am Moira. I am the Education Manager at the Wakefield Biffa project. Work alongside Julie to deliver the waste management for the area. And my job really is to explain to the public how we manage all types of waste, engage people in their waste management, and try and help everyone to kind of work together to get it right. So I'm going to go through today a few different things. So we're going to have a look at why food waste is a problem. We're going to have a look at how the waste is processed in the Wakefield district. Then we're going to have a look at simpler recycling, which is new legislation. We're going to look at how it affects businesses, first of all, because that is already in place. Then we'll look at households, so how it will affect all residents across the district. Julie's going to help me out with that bit specifically. And then at the end, we'll have a look at some tips on reducing food waste. So at a personal level, what we can do to help out with this. And like we say, questions at the end, we'll try our best to answer those. I will leave my email at the end as well. If there's anything that we can't answer, we'll try and get back to you with that one. So food waste, what's the problem? Food waste is a massive problem when it comes to climate change. It also has social and economic problems associated with it. So 25 to 30% of all the food waste produced globally is lost, which is about 1.3 billion tonnes a year. It's estimated that about 28% of the agricultural land globally is used for food waste, whether that's growing crops or growing crops to feed animals. And it generates about 8 to 10% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. That's a bit that doesn't get spoken about quite so much. We often talk about how air travel, transport, things like that affect global warming, affect the climate change, but food waste is a massive contributor. So even when food waste is collected separately and recycled, the resources used to produce the food are largely wasted. So it's excellent when we can collect food waste and recycle it using anaerobic digestion, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about at a later date, later in this presentation. But even if you're doing that, the life cycle of the production and transportation of the food is still contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. And it's estimated that each person in the UK throws away around 70 kilograms of food a year, which is about 24,990 tonnes across the Wakefield district. That is quite a difficult thing to visualise. I think when we talk about things in reference to tonnage, if you don't see that on a regular basis, which would be great if everyone could come and see it, but we don't see it on a regular basis, it's quite difficult to actually visualise how much food that actually is, because it's quite shocking. If it were a country, so if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and the USA. That's quite shocking. So if all of the food waste globally, we get the emissions from that and we put it on a chart of all of the different countries, it would come third. So you can see that if we can tackle the food waste issue, it can have a major impact on how we tackle climate change. So reducing food waste has a financial, environmental and social, I didn't put social on there, and social importance. Okay, obviously there are people that don't have access to good food, and that is a problem in the UK as well as globally. It's not something that is happening elsewhere, it's something that's happening right here. Food costs money, it is expensive, and we don't want to be wasting it, especially when people are struggling with the cost of living crisis, and obviously the environmental impact that we've already spoken about. So in the UK, 60% of food waste comes from households. People quite often believe that the majority of food waste comes from farming or from the manufacturers. or from restaurants and things like that. But actually only about 1/3 of it does. The majority of it is in households. And that is from food being bought and just not eaten. So it's about 18 million tonnes of greenhouse emissions a year come from households wasting food. Top wasted foods: bananas, tomatoes, potatoes, slices of bread. I don't know, when you think about the food waste in your house, you might have dialed into this webinar because you're already on it with reducing your food waste and you really don't waste much at all. But you'll know, if not, or if you've been other people's houses and things, you'll often see half a loaf of bread in the bin because it's gone mouldy, because it's gone past its use by date, it's gone hard. The potatoes getting thrown out because they've got some eyes growing. There's a huge amount of food going to waste from people's households. So we throw away about 1/3 of everything that we buy. And if a family spends £100 a week on food, I can't see this now, that is, move that, £133 a month, which works out at £1,600 a year. Now that is a lot of money for anyone. I don't think there's anyone that would happily throw away £1,600 a year. But especially at the minute, with everything else being more expensive, it could really make a difference. So that is enough to feed 48 people for a week in terms of buying their groceries. It could be enough for one person for nearly a year. That's quite shocking that that's how much each family is throwing in the bin. Okay, so Wakefield, what do we do with it in Wakefield? So the picture here is from our site down in South Kirby. So all the waste that is generated by households across the entire district comes down to us in South Kirby at our facility there, which is where we sort out the general waste, the recycling and the green waste. It all comes to us and our job is to try and get the absolute most out of it. When you ask people, the public generally, which is my job, to go out and talk to the public, a lot of them will think that the stuff that goes in their green bin, so the general waste bin, they'll say that goes to landfill, or some people might think it gets incinerated. We actually process that waste to get as much as we possibly can out of it. It makes sense financially for us to do that, environmentally for us to do that, socially for us to do that. It doesn't make sense to throw it into landfill. So we actually remove the food waste from your residual bin and have done for a long while, since the start of the contract. The food goes into these tanks and gets processed. Now, I've got a little video. It is 1 minute long and hopefully it will let me share it with you. I'm going to have to go to the YouTube page to share it. Lovely. There isn't any sound on this video, so you don't need to check your microphones and stuff like that. It is just so that you can see inside and see how it is that we're sorting the waste out. Okay, so this is the waste delivered. The trucks come, your bin wagons come and deliver it like this. It goes along a conveyor and it gets shredded. So everything is shredded up into small pieces, and then a vibrating floor shakes out all of the food and organic matter. Okay, so any garden waste that's ended up in there, anything else that's organic comes along. Stored in a big bunker, and then it decomposes. And then we capture that methane and convert it into electricity. And that electricity is used to power our facility. The other byproduct of that is the digestate from that stuff at the bottom, which is like a sludge that's full of nutrients, and that goes out and gets put onto land to put the nutrients back into the land. We do also try and take out anything recyclable from that general waste. So when people accidentally, or they're not sure what they should be putting in their bin, if they end up, oh, don't play that one. If they end up putting something like metal items into their recycling bin, it still gets taken out and it still gets recycled. We obviously prefer them, the correct ones, to be in the recycling bin because it's much easier for us to get it to the right place. But we do take as much as possible out of that residual bin. So we take out the metal, steel and aluminium. We take out the plastic bottles and they get sent for recycling. We take out all of the organic waste and that gets sent for recycling. And the bit that's left, the non-recyclable waste, like crisp packets, at the moment, pots, tubs, trays, it's mostly plastic things. They get sent to Infinium and get burnt for energy from waste. There we go. Okay, so that's how we currently separate and process your general waste as it comes to us. So that is how the food is taken out. There is a lot of change going on at the minute in terms of new legislation and rules coming through. So we're going to talk a little bit about simpler recycling. So if you work for a business that has more than 10 full-time employees, you should now know about simpler recycling and be following these new rules. Now, this is if you work for a business as a whole. It's not about how many people work on your site. It's about the entire business. So if you work for a company that's got 15 people, but it's across 3 different sites, you need to have these facilities in at all 3 different sites. So what does it mean? So from the 31st of March 2025, so it's not been going that long, all businesses with more than 10 full-time employees need to separate recyclable materials, making sure they're kept separate. Now it's called simpler recycling. It's a little bit complicated. Hopefully I can explain this to you properly, so don't panic yet. We need to collect glass bottles and jars. So that is all of your jam jars, sauce jars, glass bottles, beer bottles, all that kind of stuff. We've always been able to do that here, so that's fine. Metal cans, so spaghetti hoops and dog food, tins, Coke and fizzy drinks and things like that, aerosols, foil, and tubes. And tubes here, it means metal tubes, so things like tomato puree. Then plastic bottles, pots, tubs, and trays means all of your other plastic things like yogurt pots, fruit punnets, meat trays, ice cream tubs, all of those kind of things. Then tubes and cartons. So that means tubes as in Pringles, that kind of thing. And cartons is like Tetra Pak that you get milk alternatives and juice and that kind of thing in. Then all your cardboard and paper. And then you have to have a separate food waste collection, a weekly separate food waste collection. And then you'd have your residual. There is no minimum weight of food that has to be collected before you need this to apply. So you can't say, well, we've got 20 people working here, but they bring their own lunch and they take it home with them. You still have to provide that food waste service for them. This little graphic here is just showing that in 2027, plastic film will be added as well. So that'll be plastic bags, the film off the top of the raspberries, yogurt pot lids, that kind of thing. We don't need to go into that too much. So how is it different? Previously, there was no legal requirement for businesses to separate their recycling. So some did, some didn't. It mostly depended on how much recycling they were producing. So a lot of schools would have just a paper recycling bin because of the amount of cardboard and paper they get through. Some pubs might have had a glass recycling bin, but they didn't have to have them. It was up to them what worked for them, because obviously there is a cost associated with having your waste collected. So generally, more bins equaled higher costs. The waste collector, so whoever you choose to collect your waste from your business, could say what they collected. So obviously your household, that gets collected by the council. You don't have a say in that. But your business, you get to choose who collects your waste. So it might be Wakefield Council, it might be Biffa, it could be Suez, it could be any one of a number of companies that exist. Also, if recyclable waste was mixed with the general waste, it didn't count as contamination. So you could have one bin, throw it all in there, even if there's recyclables in there, it still was fine and it could be collected and taken away to be processed in whatever way that company decided. It is now obviously a legal requirement to separate them. This is the bit where it's a little bit more complicated. So everyone has to collect all of these materials. So the metals, all of the different plastic, paper and card, separate for food, and then glass. But how they collect them, whether they mix them or not, is different depending on who is collecting it. But why the change? Because it's complicated, it's big, everyone has to get involved with it. So why are we doing it? So DEFRA, the Department for Education, Food and Rural Affairs, has implemented the Separation of Waste Regulation 2024. So we call it Simpler Recycling. It was called Consistency for a while, but now it's Simpler Recycling. And it's hoping to make it so that all households and all businesses across England, and it is England, not the UK, will have standardised, simplified recycling. So everyone collects the same thing. So there's no confusion when you move from place to place. So I'm talking to you about Wakefield. I live in Bradford. I'm from Sheffield, and every single place I go, the bins are different and what goes in them is different. This way, wherever I am, I will be able to get a plastic bottle and know it can be recycled. It's about removing the recyclable material from the general waste into the recycling. Like I said, some things our facilities can take out. So we will use a magnet to take the steel out of the residual bin and recycle it. But the quality of that recycling won't be as good. It's expensive. It's not very efficient to do it that way. But some things we can't. So if you put paper in your normal household bin, it's gone because it's got wet and dirty. It's no longer recyclable. So this way, everyone knows it goes in the recycling bin. So we should increase the amount of recyclates in the recycling bin and reducing contamination in the recycling bin because everyone's doing the same. So recycling has been around about 25 years, 2010. By 2010, every local authority had to collect at least 2 types of recycling curbside. And everyone kind of took to it quite well. Everyone got involved. 90% of UK citizens regularly were recycling. And from 2000 to 2012, the recycling rate went from 11 to 44%. Great. Problem is, after that, we've pretty much stagnated at around 45%, a little bit less. It goes up a bit, it goes down a bit, but it never really gets to the heights that we're aiming for. So this new approach is aiming to hit a target of 65% recycling for the UK by 2035. There is precedent for it. They bought it in Wales, and Wales are now the second best recyclers in the world as far as countries go. There was a 34% increase in recycling volumes in businesses when they bought it in. So it has been trialled elsewhere. It does work. We just need to work through the process and make sure everyone knows what's happening. So how will it affect your business? So if your business has more than 10 full-time employees or equivalent, so if you have loads of part-time and the hours add up to at least 10 full-time, then you're in scope for doing this. You will have a legal duty to separate your waste, and you need to talk with your waste collector, who also has a legal duty to collect it separately, to make sure you're compliant. The bit where it's a bit complicated, like I said, is that different companies might want you to separate it differently depending on how they've evaluated theirs. So if you have Biffa collecting your waste from your business, you will have a recycling bin that has the paper and card mixed with the glass, with the metals and with the plastics. And then you'll have a separate bin for glass, and then your general and your food. Because they've put in place what is called a TEEP assessment to show that they can mix the paper with those things and take it out and it won't affect the recycling at all. That's absolutely fine for us to mix it like that. But they've decided they want the glass separately because of how they're processing it and the things they have to process them. And then they have a separate food waste bin because they're going to collect that food waste and take it to a separate anaerobic digestion processor. So they do not want it mixed in because they have no way of separating it. That is different again if you have the council do it. So I'm going to pass over to Julie to talk about how the council do it. I think that's next. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here today. Thanks for that overview, Moira. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the options for customers of the council. That's the commercial business customers. That might be the corner shop or the local pub or a local office. I'll also touch on the service that the council employees will shortly be receiving, and there'll be some information coming through the corporate network shortly on that. So the service, so Moira's explained that depending on the different type of technology selection that each of these waste providers delivers will depend on how many bins will be needed to be presented and the material sorted into by each business. So at the moment, the planned service for the council's business customers will be the following. So hopefully everybody can see the graphic. So Moira explained that if you go to Biffa, for example, you will be required to keep glass separate from the dry recycling containers. However, if you're a customer of the Wakefield Council service, that won't be required, because we will be requiring or relying upon an exemption to collect that material together. And what that means is we already collect that material together at the moment. There's no deterioration in quality. We've never seen any of our paper and cardboard, for example, rejected from any of the UK paper mills, and that's what we want to continue to do. So business customers will place all of these new items along with the existing items in their recycling bin, and that will be collected as normal by the council and then taken to the Biffa site that Moira talked about earlier down at South Kirby. When it comes to food waste, business customers, again, will shortly be receiving information on the food waste service that the council can provide. And we will be asking all of those customers to segregate their food waste separately from their recycling and also from the non-recyclable waste, which is the general residual waste, which Moira touched on earlier. So that's things like contaminated paper and cardboard. For example, if you've had a takeaway pizza and it was quite a sloppy pizza and it's impregnated into the cardboard, then that's no longer suitable for recycling. So that will need to go into the residual waste bin. But things like tea bags, eggshells, coffee grounds, leftover food will now need to be separated into a separate food waste caddy. If you could pass the next slide, please, Moira. So this is just, again, a graphic of what now needs to go into each waste bin if you are a customer of the Wakefield Council Trade Waste Service. So touched upon the food waste. So you can see there the tea bags, the fruit, the leftovers. In the mixed recycling, Moira gave a great run through of the types of materials that now need to go into your recycling bin, but it also includes plastic tubes. Now, generally speaking, we wouldn't necessarily see a lot of plastic tubes being presented by businesses. Plastic tubes such as toothpaste tubes, but that's not to say that people won't generate that type of material at work. So those items now need to be cleaned and placed into the mixed dry recycling bin. And then the remainder items, coffee cups, polystyrene, although polystyrene is now reducing in society because of previous bans on single-use plastics that the government have implemented. Crisp packets at the moment, Moira touched on films. Films will come into scope, hopefully, from 2027 onwards. And there's a lot of work being undertaken nationally on what is the best method of collecting these films from both businesses and also residents, because you can imagine they are quite voluminous, they're very, very lightweight. And is it best to, for example, place them in an existing bag, like a bread bag, or is it more, will we collect more if we provide a different colour bag, which we can then remove from the waste stream and then send that to a specialist processor? But all that detail will become clear over the next 12 to 18 months, hopefully, before we have to implement that change come 2027. Next slide, please, Moira. So Wakefield Council customers have all received some information about the advised changes to the regulations and what will be required to their waste collections. The arrangements are still being finalised, and the problem we are delayed in that is that we have struggled to find a contractor to collect the food waste. We are talking with the contractor at the moment. We're just finalising that contract because the council is not in a position at the moment to be able to provide that food waste collection service itself. We've also had some delays in obtaining caddies. If you can imagine, the whole of the UK, any business that is looking to provide that service to its customers have all placed orders for bins, for new food waste caddies and new food waste bins, vehicles to collect that material. And so there is a real pressure point in the UK from a procurement perspective, and that is causing some delays. And equally, some of our neighbouring authorities like Barnsley and Doncaster and Rotherham are also facing those delays, as are Kirklees. So, as I say, we are finalising those arrangements for the collection of food waste, and as soon as we've got that all finalised, we'll be advising all of our businesses of the service and the date for rolling out that service as soon as possible. Thank you, Moira. Next slide, please.
Oh, household. Go on, I think it's still you.
Yeah. So Moira's explained earlier on in the presentation that simpler recycling or consistency in collections has been implemented for commercial and business customers and some non-domestic premises such as hospitals, educational establishments, schools, and what have you. And there will be a requirement for all local authorities to make arrangements for the separate collection of food waste from all households from the 31st of March next year. So that's 2026. Obviously, that is going to place an additional burden in the market and in the sector for, again, vehicles, but also the caddies and the liners and other paraphernalia that we need to provide to residents to allow that collection. In Wakefield, as you've seen from Moira's presentation, we've been for the last 10 years mechanically removing the food waste element from the residual waste bin. And we've been doing that quite successfully for the last 10 years. The requirement to move to a separate food waste collection service would mean that the council would effectively have to look at terminating part of its long-term waste contract with Biffa. The termination costs and the changes to the service that will be required, I'm sure you can appreciate, will attract a huge financial cost for the council. And so what has been agreed with DEFRA, that a number of authorities, there's 30 of us at the moment, because of where they are with their existing waste contracts, and because Wakefield in particular is already removing the food waste element from the residual waste bin without the need to have a separate bin and up to 20 new wagons to go around and collect all of this material separately from across the Wakefield district, they have given us what are called transitional arrangements. And those arrangements have been enacted through regulations, commencement number 9 here on the screen. And what that basically means, we're named as one of the local authorities that is not required by law to provide a separate food waste collection to households and those relevant non-domestic premises served by the council and its collections until the end of the contract. Now, the end of that contract date is 2038. We have approached DEFRA and asked the question, could we, if we wanted to and we could afford to bring that food waste service on earlier, could we do that? And government have advised that there may be an opportunity to bring that service on earlier. However, the council would have to fund that transition and obviously fund the contractor for the changes to the facilities down at South Kirby. So, but But those transitional arrangements don't apply to the small number of commercial customers that we service across the Wakefield district at the moment. And that is why we are looking to provide the commercial waste service for food via a third-party contractor who's better prepared to deliver that service at the moment, because we just don't have the resources currently to do that. Now, that may change in the future, and Biffa may be able to help us with that moving forwards, but because of the pressures that we're currently experiencing with resources, that's not feasible at the moment. But as I say, it's something we are looking at for the future. Next slide, please, Moira. So we talked about the householders, and also I mentioned this term called relevant non-domestic premises, and that includes, as you can just see on the slide here on the right, residential homes, educational establishments, hospitals, churches and places of worship, charity shops, and some hostels. So what that means is, for all of the residents of Wakefield and those premises listed in the red box, if they are provided with a service from the council, they will not be required to have a separate food waste collection. So typically, the service moving forward into this interim transitional piece will mean that every resident in Wakefield will have 2 bins, or 3 if they have a garden waste bin at the moment. So the garden waste bin service will continue as normal, and that will at the moment continue to be a free service to Wakefield residents. A lot of our neighbours are looking to implement a charge for that garden waste service, but that's not something we're looking at the moment. And so the system for residents and business, non-domestic premises, that's schools, charities, etc., will be a 2-bin service. And again, we will collect everything commingled, because that is how we collect it at the moment, and we will continue to review that moving forwards, but I don't see that changing in the immediate future, because we will be relying on an exemption to collect all of that together. And then the food waste will continue to be collected with the non-recyclable wastes. So the non-recyclable waste obviously will start to decrease. So come the 31st of March 2026, we will see the yoghurt pots, tubs and trays, metal tubes, tomato puree tubes, toothpaste tubes, Savlon tubes, all of those items along with cartons will move out of the residual bin into the recycling bin. And hopefully residents of Wakefield will continue to support us on that journey of making sure that the majority of the recyclable materials are placed in the right bin, because as Moira's explained, that does place an additional burden on the council and on the contractor if those recyclable items are not placed in the right bin. So Moira and myself, we undertook some compositional analyses a couple of years ago, and whilst there were approximately 60 million plastic bottles placed in the dry recycling bin in 2021-2022, unfortunately, there were 48 million plastic bottles still being placed in the residual bin. Now, we do recover those plastic bottles out of the residual bin. Moira's explained that earlier in the presentation. However, the challenge is that because those plastic bottles have been in with dirty nappies and other elements of the food, they've got covered in material, they're classed as unclean. We then have to pay for those to be washed if we can get them into a wash plant before they can then be recycled. And that places an additional financial burden on everybody. So we will be promoting the message of placing all recyclables that are clean in the dry recyclable bin moving forward. And that message will come out over the next 12 months as we align the facilities at South Kirby to allow these new recyclables, the pots, the tubs, the trays, the cartons, the tubes, and then latterly in 2027, if but we may look at it before for plastic films going into the recycling bin. Next slide, please, Moira. So again, this is just a graphic. This is just to represent what will be placed by residents in the recycling bin from the 31st of March 2026. So you'll see the plastic pots, tubs, trays, tubes, and then obviously the materials that still will stay in the general waste, which will encompass all of the food waste material, which we mechanically remove and have done for the last 10 years and put through their anaerobic digestion process. And then the benefits are that we generate methane, which is converted to electricity on the site, as Moira's explained, and the digestate then is beneficially used on spoilt land as a growing media. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Cheers, Julie. Yeah, so this is literally just going over that again. So the only change that you'll see to your curbside bins, because I imagine that you might start to see things coming out in the media soon about this, because it is going to be a nationwide change. I mean, it happened a few years ago, a lot of hysteria. Everyone's going to have 8 bins. That is not going to happen. Maximum anywhere will be 4 bins, but in Wakefield, it will be 2 or 3, depending on whether you have your garden waste bin. So we will continue to use the bins that we already have. The food waste will continue to be taken out of your general waste bin and processed on our site. And it's just the materials accepted in the recycling bin that will increase, and we will make sure that is communicated to everyone. So the last little bit then is tips on reducing your food waste. So we've shown how the food waste is processed once it goes into the bin, but obviously that only helps with stopping those greenhouse gas emissions from food ending up in landfill. It is always better to reduce and reuse waste before you recycle it. That is the waste hierarchy. Reducing food waste is one of the best things you can do to tackle climate change. So a few little tips. These are mostly from RAP, which is the recycling charity, and they've got a few. They do Food Waste Action Week every year, and these are the graphics from this year here. So the research shows that if apples, bananas and potatoes were sold loose instead of in bags, sold by weight, we could save 60,000 tonnes of food each year. So they have a list, if you go on the Love Food Hate Waste website, of I think it's 20 foods that should never be packaged in plastic, and they are contributing to this food waste. So apples, potatoes, carrots, lemons, limes, things like that. Putting them in plastic does not help to extend their shelf life. In some cases, it reduces it because they sweat in there. It means that you buy more. So sometimes you only want 2 carrots and you end up with a massive bag of carrots. And then they're just going all bouncy in the bottom of your fridge. If you can buy just what you need, you're less likely to waste them at the end. So buying loose is great. We've got loads of lovely markets in Wakefield District where you can buy loose fruit and veg cheaper than the supermarket. Last time I was in Pontefract, worth a visit if you can. And a lot of supermarkets do now have the opportunity to buy loose, and you just weigh it there and then. Making sure you're storing your food correctly. So there's loads of apps and things online you can find to show you how to lay your fridge out correctly so that you are going to maximise the shelf life of those foods. But it's things like not putting your milk in the door of the fridge. The door of the fridge is where the temperature changes the most, because obviously it's getting opened, closed, opened, closed. That milk is one of your most likely items to go off. It needs to be stored somewhere where there's a regular temperature. Also, most people's fridges are at least 2 degrees too warm, so it's worth checking the temperature of your fridge. It should be 5 degrees or below to ensure that those foods that say have a use-by date, they are banking on you storing them correctly. It is only that use-by date. Milk only has that use-by date if it's kept in a cold fridge. If you put your milk in a warm cupboard, it's definitely not going to last a week. So make sure you're storing it correctly. Make sure your fridge is the right temperature, like I say. Try and shut the door. Don't do the classic of opening the door just to have a stare in the fridge. You're probably bored, not hungry, so make sure you're closing the door. And when you're getting something out, close it, open it, put it back in. Know your label. So there's been a lot of talk recently about labels and quite a few changes. A lot of foods have had their best before label taken off because that just refers to the quality. If the best before date has passed, a lot of foods are still perfectly safe to eat. So there's a list down here at the bottom. My favourite one is when they used to have a best before on dried pasta. That is definitely not going off. It says here it can be 3 years after that best before date. It is just about the quality. And things like dried food and tinned foods, they last so much longer than their actual best before date. So a lot of best befores have now been taken off foods. The use by refers to a safety date on there. So that will be on things like meats, dairy products, fish, things where they could cause food poisoning if you eat them after that safe date. And again, that's a safe date if it has been stored correctly. You shouldn't use your senses like you can with the others if you're using something with a use by date, because some of that bacteria will be odorless, it might be colourless, so it might smell fine, but actually it's going to make you quite ill. So use by is important. Best before doesn't really matter. It, like it says down here, look, smell, taste, don't waste. If it's soft when it should be hard, maybe don't eat it. If it smells funny, don't eat it. Plan ahead, so planning your shopping properly. Some people do a full week's worth of menus that they're going to plan. It doesn't have to be that structured. You know, busy family life, you might decide actually that day that person's going to football practice, so they're not going to be around, switch it around. Do what works for you, but make a plan. Write a shopping list so you don't buy things you've already got. Take a shelfie. It's something I say all the time. My partner hates it. Because I'm too lazy often to write a shopping list, or I leave it, I will take a photograph of the inside of my fridge or the shelf, so that when I'm in the shop, I can see whether I actually need to buy any cheese or whether I've got 3 blocks already in the fridge drawer. It's just a quicker way of doing it. Try and use up your leftovers. So you can take them for your lunch the next day, you can reuse them, turn them into new meals that you might want to eat. If you are storing leftovers, make sure you are labelling them. There is nothing more depressing than defrosting your butternut squash soup to find out it's actually like a sorbet, mango sorbet. You need a label on there. You need to know how long it's been frozen for, so it's safe. But it's a good way of saving food, especially if you've got space in your freezer. Stock rotation. When you buy new stuff, make sure you use the old stuff first. So you might have an eat me first drawer in your fridge where you put the odds and ends of cheese, the half an avocado, so that people know not to go and open a new one before they've finished that. And if you're really keen on reducing your food waste, you could do a waste audit. It sounds gross, but it is fascinating. You essentially pour your rubbish out onto a big tarpaulin or a bin bag or whatever, go through it, find out what it is that you're throwing away. If you're throwing away half a loaf of bread every week, then maybe don't buy so much bread, or put half a loaf in the freezer to eat later. If your child is bringing home the same thing from their packed lunch and throwing it in the bin every day, change it up, don't buy that anymore. So looking at what's actually in your bins is a great way of finding out what it is that you're wasting. And the last one, I think, is just to really love your freezer. There's very few things that can't be frozen. As long as you're freezing them correctly and labelling what you've put in there, your freezer is a brilliant way of reducing your food waste. So whether it's slices of bread, odd crumpets, half an avocado, cooked rice, as long as you're doing it safely, and I'll share these slides because it's very wordy on there, but you can always go on Love Food, Hate Waste, and there's loads of tips on there. As long as you're doing that correctly, there's loads of food that you can save from the bin by putting it in your freezer. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to pause for a minute and then we're going to have a look if there's any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Moira and Julie. We've got 5 questions so far, 4 questions so far, but I think the most relevant one to today is from Natalie, which is, if you're a business running a home care, like an adult social care service, where you're doing the work in people's homes, do these waste regulations apply to the business, even though it's most likely disposing of waste in people's homes? Have I understood the question right, Natalie?
Sounds right.
That makes sense. It's quite a technical.
Yeah. Do you want me to have a go at that, Moira?
Go on, Julie, if you know.
So if I've understood the question, so there's a care provision being provided in the home of the resident. If that's the case, then the materials generated in that home are domestic waste, unless it's a material stream that requires specialist removal. So if there are cytotoxic medicines, if there's a sharps bin, and that's being procured through the local PCT, that the Primary Care Trust or whatever they're called these days, can't keep up with them, then we will collect that sharps bin, the council will collect it. If it's a service that's being procured and delivered by, for example, a hospital setting, then that sharps bin with those medications or such will need to be taken back to the hospital for disposal. But things like medical materials such as sanitary products or things like that, they can go in the bin unless there's more than 7 kilograms a week being generated by that premises. I don't know if that's helpful.
Does that help, Natalie? You can come on and talk. It's fine. Well, that sound's not really working, is it?
Okay.
So if the employees of the home care company, would the home care company automatically have the commercial waste collection anyway as a business, but then the stuff dealt with in the home goes into the home?
I think it depends how they are set up, Stuart, to be fair. Some home care settings will say, you bring the materials back to base, and then the materials will be placed in the appropriate containers back at base. However, if it's a service that's been delivering predominantly care in the home, whether it's changing dressings or things like that, then generally speaking, unless there is an underlying medical condition that stipulates that that dressing cannot be placed in the normal domestic rubbish. So, for example, if someone's got an infection that could be classed as highly infectious, that would have to go into a separate service, things like a medical waste collection service, which again the council do provide to residents of the district as a discrete service. But if there's any other queries around that, Natalie, if you want to drop me an email or put an extra query in the chat function, I'm happy to pick that up.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got one more technical question about the regulations, which is about enforcement of the segregation. So who's checking? So the question is really about the council waste collection, the council bin, if they're not separated properly when the new legislation comes in. And the question is about homes, but I guess it applies to businesses as well.
Yeah. Do you want me to pick that one up, Moira?
Go on. I've been
So,
making attention.
Yeah. So the regulations of the guidance stipulate that the regulator for businesses, to ensure that producers are presenting their recycling and their food waste and the general waste separately from each other, that enforcement will lie with the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency have advised that it is a soft approach at the moment, because obviously they are aware of the procurement blockages in the system. People can't get the bins, they can't get the service. And so the Environment Agency have said that it will be a slow launch. What that ultimately means is they'll probably give 12 months or so to allow businesses to adjust and adopt the new regime. They then will start an approach where they will be dropping on, I imagine, the larger businesses first, because there's greater potential for lost recyclables there. With regards to councils then, So the enforcer, to ensure that councils are providing a segregated collection. And so for commercial businesses like Biffa, Suez, Viridor, again, the regulator will be the Environment Agency. So they will be contacting Viridor and Biffa, knocking on the door saying, please provide us evidence that you are collecting the material separately from all of our customers. If they ask them, will possibly ask the question, do you have any of your customers who are refusing to do this? And if they say yes, they will have to provide the details of those customers to the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency will take, again, a soft initial approach to that regulation and that enforcement, and they will ask the question, well, what is the barrier? Why haven't you got something in place? They will try and support that producer as much as possible, and only as a last resort will they want to take action against that producer. Going back to the councils then, so the enforcement body for local government is DEFRA, and DEFRA will be contacting local authorities to make sure that they've got their written assessments in place. So they will be potentially asking myself, have you got the written assessment, Julie, that allows you to still collect glass and, for example, paper together? And I will then pull off the shelf or off the computer the written assessment that provides the evidence base to say it's not economically or environmentally beneficial to do it a different way, i.e. collect it separately. So hopefully that's answered the queries around the regulator.
And is there something for the councils will be enforcing on households if they don't separate their waste properly, which I think was the underlying the question?
Yeah, so the council will be asked, and at the moment we do have an enforcement policy where we try and encourage people to place the right things in the right bin. If people contaminate their recycling bin, we tag it with a yellow tag. We monitor that tag, we contact the resident, we ask what the problem is, we highlight what the issues are. Moira and the team, the education team, will assist us with that, with educational materials, whether it be a bin sticker, support to help them to get it right. If they continue to contaminate that bin, then we may have no option but to remove that container. But then that means that then they have only got one bin and one collection over a fortnight to manage all of the waste that they generate. But we hope that they'll work with us on that. And if there are problems with understanding the scheme, we hope we'll get over those hurdles and work together on that.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Julie. Now I've got two questions that I'm definitely coming to you, Moira. They're about the biodigester. One is, how much of the South Kirby site energy comes from that methane? Is it like completely self-sufficient and off-grid or not? And who benefits from the food waste and where does it go? Do farmers and companies buy it? Not the food waste, the sludge that comes out of the digester, the
Digestate.
solid leftovers.
Coming to me. Julie's probably a better place to talk to you about this as well, actually. Go on, Julie, I can see you.
Okay, so the first question then around the amount of methane that is generated from the anaerobic digestion of the food waste that we capture out of the general waste bin. So approximately 300 megawatt hours a month is generated from the methane. The site typically consumes about 900 megawatt hours, so approximately a third of the energy demand is provided by the bacteria burping and producing methane once they've eaten the food in the digesters. The second point around the digestate then, so once the bacteria have munched on the food that's in the tanks, there is a solid material, then the fibrous material does settle out, and we separate that from the liquid fraction. The liquid fraction is then recirculated and reutilized within the process. So we don't use, for example, mains water to keep that material in solution. And that digestate is not sold at the moment. We have to pay for that material to be disposed of because of the haulage cost, the transportation cost. You can imagine it's quite a heavy material to transport. We do effectively squeeze out as much moisture out of that material as we possibly can. But because it's it's not separately collected food waste, we do have some restrictions on where this material can be sent. So at the moment, the law prohibits that material to be placed on agricultural land that's used for raising or growing crops for human consumption. So it does go on to areas for restoration, biomedial restoration. But the garden waste that we collect from all of the residents and through the household waste recycling centres, that is composted again down at South Kirby. That is composted to a British standard, so it's no longer classed as waste, it's classed as a product. And we do give that material away at certain times of the year to residents through the household waste recycling centres. And increasingly, a number of farmers are now purchasing that soil improver from us because of the nutritional benefits associated with that product as a slow release fertilizer. Some of you may be aware that because of the shortage of nitrogen-based fertilizers, because of industry changes in the UK, the demand is still great for nitrogen-based fertilizers, but the production capacity has been diminished. So typically farmers are paying 4 times the cost for a nitrogen-based fertilizer than what they were paying 4 or 5 years ago. So the soil improver that Biffa are generating is an excellent replacement for that nitrogen-based fertilizer. It also contains phosphate and potassium, which again are vital nutrients for plants that for their growing cycle. And again, those nutrients are present. So we are getting not a lot of people knocking on the door asking us for this product because it is a natural, sustainable replacement for oil-based nitrogen fertilizers.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. Karen, have we got quite time for the very last question?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. So it's from Donna. I try to buy organic, but these foods tend to be more often plastic wrapped in the supermarket rather than loose. Is there a reason for this, and what can we do? How can it be addressed?
There is a reason for it. And the problem is when it comes to actually paying for the organic veg, it needs to be distinguishable from the non-organic veg. Like you say, it is more expensive to buy organic veg. So if you've got loose on one side, organic apples, and then you've got non-organic on the other side, it's very difficult for them to distinguish between them when it comes to paying for them. So the packaging, that's why the packaging is added to it at the minute. There is people looking into different ways, so whether they can put kind of QR codes scanned onto the fruit and vegetables. I've seen it happen, which means it can be scanned when it gets to the till. But at the minute, it's about distinguishing between the two different types.
And just to add to that there's also a preconceived idea about what we want from the supermarkets. They think that we want things that are highly sanitized and wrapped up in products. They think we want fruit and vegetables that are not marked, that are a certain length, a certain color, certain shape. And as Moira mentioned earlier, a significant amount of food waste is lost at the farm gate because the supermarkets will not accept it because they say we won't buy it. And I think we really do have to look deep inwardly into our, personal thoughts and behaviours about what good food looks like and dispel some of these myths about it being unblemished. If you go abroad and you go to a supermarket or a market stall in France, there'll be little indentations, little blemishes on the fruit and the vegetables that are presented there, and they're not offered cheaper than any other vegetables there. So I think we do have to become a bit more educated on what good food actually looks like.
Thank you. That's all of the questions. So handing back to you, Karen.
Great. And that sounds like, Julia, that sounds like just a perfect place to bring us back to thinking about what good food is, which is brilliant. Thank you. I think our speakers gave us a wonderful insight into how the recycling processes work, is going to work, how recycling works at the moment and waste disposal works, which was really helpful. Thank you. And also looking deep within ourselves, like you mentioned, to think about the things maybe we could do better. You know, not leaving the fridge door open. I must try harder with that. Also, putting my fridge thermometers back in the fridge because my child likes to take them out. So simple things. So I think we could all think about little things ourselves. What can we do better? And that's where we can start, isn't it? So I'd like to thank both our speakers. Wonderful. Have done really a good job there, and all of you for joining us. So please remember, this is part of a webinar series. Look out for further webinars. If you have any wonderful ideas for us, please do share them. Go onto our website and find out more about the Food Partnership. If you have any comments about the presentations today, please do email us. And the recording, as I mentioned, we will give you the link for that and we will share the slides. So thanks very much for coming. Bye.